Montana Territory, 1871. The wind was hot with dust and the sound of bidding men. Brielle Tamer stood barefoot on the rough wooden platform, her wrists sore from rope and her mouth dry as ash. The sun was too bright, the faces below too many. She could not meet their eyes. She did not want to see what they saw when they looked at her. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, her hair tangled from the wagon ride, and her heart beat so fast she thought it might give out. $100. A man shouted, his voice thick with whiskey. Laughter followed. The auctioneer barked louder. "Come now, boys, she's young, strong, and still got all her teeth. Who'll give me $150? Brielle's stomach twisted. She had not cried when the sheriff handed her over to the men who ran this godless market. She had not screamed when they pulled her from the burned-out cabin where her father had died 2 days ago. But now, as hands pointed and boots shuffled, she felt the tears sting. 200, another shouted. She looked up then, just for a second. The man had a bloodied hat and a grin made of broken teeth. She flinched. The crowd hushed when he stepped forward. He was tall, with dust on his shoulders and a calm way of standing that made space around him. He wore a plain shirt, worn jeans, a revolver at his hip, but it was not the gun that quieted the men. It was his eyes, steady, cold like river stone. $500, he said. The auctioneer blinked. "What, you heard me?" The cowboy's voice was low, even. 500. "That buys me the girl and it ends this circus." Someone laughed, but it died fast. "Do I hear 6? The auctioneer tried. The cowboy pulled a folded stack of bills from his coat and tossed it at the man's chest. "You don't." "Well, hell," the auctioneer muttered, catching the money. The rope was cut from her wrists. The crowd parted as the cowboy walked up the steps and held out a hand. Brielle didn't move. He kept his voice low, quiet enough that only she could hear. "You're safe in my arms now, I give you my word." Her lips trembled. She let him help her down. He led her past the wagons and the leering men, one hand resting lightly at her back. She walked like someone just waking from a nightmare. They reached a buckskin horse tied near the edge of the lot. "Name's Xander Shaw," he said, helping her up into the saddle. "I've got a place west of here." "It's quiet. Nobody'll find you there." She looked down at him. "Why did you do it?" He tightened the saddle's cinch before meeting her eyes again. "Because no one else was going to." He swung up behind her, careful not to crowd her, and took the reins. They rode out of town under the wide, watching sky. They said nothing for a long time. The cabin sat nestled between hills, with a corral out back and a creek running down the slope. It was plain but clean. The porch had 2 chairs. A wind chime made of tin spoons hung from a rafter. Xander helped her down and gestured toward the door. "You can have the bed, I'll sleep out here." She paused. "You bought me." He shook his head. "No, I paid to end it, that's different." She stared at him, searching for some angle, some hunger in his eyes, but his gaze was steady, kind. Inside, she found the bed made, a basin of water and a folded dress at the end of the mattress. It was worn but clean. The first night, she barely slept. She listened instead to the wind, the creek, the sound of Xander chopping wood in the dark. By morning, her hands found comfort in work. She swept the floor, boiled coffee, and watched him from the doorway as he mended a fence post. His movements were slow and sure, like he knew how to make things last. "You always rescue strangers?" she asked, bringing out a tin cup of coffee. "No," he said, taking it. "Just you." She blinked, surprised by the warmth that rose in her chest. Over the next week, she learned the rhythm of the place. He let her be, never asked questions, never touched her without reason. But he always looked her in the eye, always spoke soft, always listened. One night she sat beside him on the porch. The stars stretched overhead and the fire crackled in a tin bucket between them. "I had a brother," she said. "He died in the fire with my father." Xander said nothing, just looked down at his hands. She breathed in slow. "The men who auctioned me. They called it justice, said my father owed debts, that I was payment." Xander picked up a small stick and tossed it into the fire. "That's not justice, that's evil dressed in law." She turned her face toward him. "Why do you care?" He met her eyes. "Because a long time ago, someone saved me when I needed it most. I never forgot what it felt like." His voice cracked just barely at the end. She touched his hand just for a second, and he let her. That night she dreamed of the creek and the sound of his voice saying, "You're safe in my arms." In the morning, she woke to the smell of biscuits and eggs and the sound of Xander humming low in the kitchen. She smiled. For the first time in weeks, she smiled. And outside, the sun climbed up over the hills, soft and full of promise. The creek had risen from spring melt, running fast and loud through the ravine behind the cabin. Brielle stood at its edge, sleeves rolled past her elbows, skirt tied at the knees. She scrubbed a shirt against the washboard Xander had left her, fingers numb in the snow-fed current. The ache in her hands felt honest. It steadied her across the water. A fox moved low through the brush, unnoticed by the chickens pecking near the coop. She watched it disappear into the tall grass, then turned her attention back to the soap-lathered cloth. Behind her, the creak of the porch told her he'd come outside. She didn't turn. "You ever work cattle?" Xander's voice came from the slope above, not loud. She wrung out the shirt and hung it over a pine branch. "No, but I can learn," he nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I've got a few that need doctorin'. One's favor in his back leg. Thought you might help." She looked over her shoulder then. "You trust me with your animals." He stepped down the hill, glancing toward the water. "They don't lie, neither do you." She followed him up past the barn where the corral held 5 head. One of the steers limped when it moved. She climbed through the rails without waiting to be asked. He handed her a coil of rope and watched as she approached the animal, slow and low, voice even. "You've got good hands," he said when she tied it off to the post, firm but not cruel. "I used to help with the horses back home. My brother taught me to look for signs, ears pinned, tail twitchin'. He said animals always tell you what they need if you know how to listen." Xander knelt beside the steer, brushing mud from its flank. "He sounds like he was worth knowin'." She didn't answer. Her hands were steady on the halter as the animal shifted. He wrapped the leg tight but not too tight, then stood. "Should rest a few days. I'll keep him penned." They leaned against the rail afterward, watching the others mill. The air smelled like clover and dust. "You ever think about leaving Montana?" she asked after a while. He shook his head. "Not since I bought this land. Took me 6 years to get the deed, 4 more to build the place up right. I'm not a man who runs." She studied the line of his jaw, the way the sun caught in the crease of his brow. "I wasn't asking if you ran. Just if you ever dreamed." He let the silence stretch long before answering. "There was a time I thought about Oregon, heard the valleys soft and green all year, but dreams don't mean much when you owe people your word." She picked a leaf from the fence post. "What do you owe Xander?" He looked at her then, not sidelong but straight. "Right now, I owe you safety, a place to stand until you figure what you want." She dropped her gaze, brushing her fingers over the wood grain. "And what if this is what I want?" His breath caught just barely. He didn't move closer, didn't speak. "I'm not asking for anything," she added. "Just don't turn away." He reached out, slow and careful, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I won't." They didn't touch again, but something settled between them, quiet as dusk. That night, she sat at the table while he carved strips of venison. The oil lamp burned low, flickering shadows on the walls. He passed her a plate, and she took it without a word. The meal was plain meat, beans, bread, but it filled more than her stomach. "You ever been in love?" she asked, watching him pass the salt. He shook his head once. "No, I've known want, and I've known fear, but love's something else." She nodded, chewing slow. "I think I'd know it if I felt it." He watched her a moment, then lowered his gaze. "If you do, you won't have to guess." Later, she lay awake on the bed, listening to the wind press against the cabin walls. His boots thudded soft on the porch as he settled into the chair out front, same as always. She closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come right away. Instead, she let her mind trace the shape of his hand on her cheek, the quiet way he'd said her name earlier when she dropped the kettle, as if it were a thing worth handling with care. When morning came, she rose before the sun and found him already at the stove, boiling water for coffee. "I want to help fix the fence by the east pasture," she said, tying her hair back with a strip of cloth. He didn't ask why, didn't tell her to rest. He just poured her a cup and nodded. They drank in silence, side by side, while the sky lightened through the slats of the window. And when they stepped outside together into the fresh morning air, it felt like something had shifted, not loud or sudden, but sure, like earth after rain. A late frost rolled in overnight, silvering the grass and turning the sky the color of pewter. Xander pulled his coat tighter as he saddled the mule for a supply trip into town. Brielle stood on the porch with a woven basket, face turned toward the ridgeline. Her eyes had grown clearer these past weeks, less guarded, but not yet light. "I'll be gone most the day," he said, tying the last strap. "If you need anything from the mercantile, write it down and I'll see to it." She stepped off the porch, handing him the basket. "There's some eggs in there, maybe trade for flour." He tucked the basket into the saddlebag. "You sure you'll be all right on your own?" "I'm not helpless, Xander," he nodded. "I know." She watched him ride out until the dust settled behind the hill, then turned back toward the barn. The chickens needed turning out, and the loom inside hadn't been touched since his mother passed. Her hands needed something finer than fence wire and firewood. Inside the barn, she found a spindle tucked into a crate, wrapped in muslin, the wood still smooth. She carried it into the house, cleared the table, and began sorting what clean wool she could find from the sack near the hearth. By noon, she'd worked a rhythm into her hands' draw, twist, wind. The motion steadied her, not from fear but from the weight of stillness. When the door creaked open hours later, she looked up, expecting Xander. But the man who stepped inside was shorter, with a drooping mustache and a badge pinned to his vest. "Ma'am," he said, removing his hat. "Name's Deputy Carver. I'm looking for a Miss Brielle Tamer." She stood slowly, the spindle slipping from her lap. "Why?" "Got word she was seen out this way." "There's still questions about her father's debts. Some folks in Miles City think she owes restitution." Her jaw tightened. "I don't owe anyone anything." He shifted, not quite meeting her eyes. "I'm not here to drag you off, just need to know you're safe." "There's talk about what happened at that auction. Some men feel slighted." She stepped forward, voice low. "If they feel slighted, it's because they didn't get to finish what they started." He looked uncomfortable. "You stay in here with Mr. Shaw?" "I am." He scratched behind his ear, eyes drifting to the door. "Good man, from what I've heard, keeps to himself." She folded her arms. "He saved my life." The deputy nodded once. "Then I'll say you weren't here and be on my way." He left without asking more. She watched him ride off, heart pounding not in fear but from the echo of old threats. When Xander returned near dusk, the mule heavy with sacks, she met him halfway down the path. "You had company," she said. He set the reins down. "Who?" "Deputy. Said some men from Miles City still think I'm property they lost." He didn't speak right away, just reached forward and brushed a light streak of dirt from her cheek. "Did he threaten you?" "No, but he saw me. That might be enough." He took a breath and looked toward the hills, jaw clenched. "We'll move the cattle closer to the house. Add a crossbar to the door. If they come, they won't like what they find. I'm not afraid of them anymore." He looked back at her. "Then you're braver than anyone I've ever known." That night, she didn't return to the bed alone. She walked to the porch, where he sat watching the moon rise over the trees, a rifle across his lap. "You can't sit out here every night waiting for ghosts," she said, folding a shawl around her shoulders. "I'll do what I have to." She sat beside him, not touching, but close. "What if I wanted you inside?" He didn't turn. "For safety, for me." He looked at her then, slow and searching. "You sure?" She nodded once. He stood, offering his hand. She took it, fingers steady, inside the cabin, nothing rushed. He moved like he always had, with patience, with care. When the fire burned low, she lay beside him, her fingers tracing the line of his collarbone. "I never thought I'd feel safe in a man's arms again." He kissed the top of her head. "Then let this be the last place you ever need to." Her eyes closed, body softening against his. Outside, the wind shifted, blowing from the west, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Inside, two hearts beat slow and certain, finding their rhythm in the quiet. The thaw came early that year, loosening the earth in long, muddy streaks and coaxing the cottonwoods into pale green bud. Snowmelt ran thick through the creek, drowning out birdsong with its rush. Xander dug a trench behind the barn to keep the lower stalls from flooding, and Brielle patched the roof where spring rains had found a soft spot in the rafters. They worked without needing to speak much. He passed her nails. She steadied the ladder, but something in the quiet had shifted. After supper, she pulled her stool to the hearth and reached for the mending basket. He watched her thread the needle, her fingers sure, her shoulders relaxed. The firelight caught the curve of her cheek as she bent over a rip in his work shirt. You always so like that? He asked, leaning back in the chair across from her. Like what? Careful, like each stitch has weight. She didn't glance up. Mama taught me to treat every repair like it mattered. Said even worn things deserve to be whole. He ran a hand through his hair, watching the flicker of the flames. Did she teach you music too? Brielle blinked. Why do you ask? Sometimes you hum, when you think I'm not listening. Sounds like a tune passed down. She set the shirt aside, thread still dangling. She used to sing while folding laundry, mostly hymns, but sometimes old folk songs. My brother said her voice made the walls feel warmer. Xander shifted, resting an elbow on the arm of his chair. You ever think about singing again? She hesitated. Not since the fire. He didn't press, only nodded. The next morning, the male rider passed through, his horse lathered and eyes wary. Xander stepped out to meet him, exchanging a few words before retreating inside with a folded slip of paper. Brielle watched his face as he read it, the muscles at his jaw tightening. What is it? She asked. He handed it to her without speaking. The note was brief and written in a jagged hand. Word had reached Miles City that Brielle had not left the territory. Two men were riding west, asking after a girl with dark hair and a birthmark on her right wrist. She folded the paper again, slower than necessary. So they're coming. They won't get past me, she raised her eyes. There's only one of you. He stepped closer, voice firm. There's two of us now. Later that day, she dug out the rifle from behind the stovepipe. He raised an eyebrow as she checked the chamber. My brother taught me to shoot, she said. I was better with the long barrel than he ever was. I believe it. They spent the afternoon stacking wood along the porch and moving tools from the shed to the house. She did not shake or falter. He did not question her resolve. By nightfall, the cabin felt different, more like something fortified than something hiding. He cooked beans and salt pork, and they ate without much talk. Afterward, she stood by the window, arms folded, watching the moon rise through a haze of cloud. I keep thinking about what they'll say when they see me again, she said. Xander didn't look up from where he was drying the tin plates. Does it matter? It used to. He set the cloth down. And now, she turned, her voice quiet but certain. Now I only care what you see when you look at me. His eyes softened, but he didn't move to her. I see a woman who stood when others tried to break her. I see strength wrapped in quiet. I see someone who doesn't need saving, but who let me save her anyway. She crossed the room, slow but sure, and placed her hand over his. I let you because I wanted to. He looked at her fingers, then laced his through them. You reckon we could build something out of all this? We already are. It was not a kiss that sealed it, but the way their foreheads came together in the dim light, breath mingling, heart steady. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, but inside the cabin, nothing wavered. When morning came, they rose together, side by side, to meet what waited beyond the ridge. Whatever came next, they would face it not as strangers, but as something forged and chosen. And in the quiet between dawn and daylight, their hands found one another without hesitation. The men came 3 days after the letter arrived. Just after sunrise, a hawk screamed over the ridge and the rooster fell silent. Brielle stood at the window, one hand on the frame, eyes narrowed toward the east field. Xander was already outside, tightening the last loop of wire at the back pasture. She stepped onto the porch, rifle slung across her shoulder, and called his name once. He turned, followed her line of sight, and gave a single nod. Two riders, both strangers, moved slow along the trail, dust rising behind them like breath from a waiting animal. Brielle stepped down and met him halfway. They're not carrying bedrolls. No, Xander said. They didn't come to stay. Just to take. They didn't speak again as the riders approached. Both men dismounted without invitation. One was thick-chested, with a scar running from his ear down to his collar. The other had narrow eyes that flicked between them like a weasel testing a trap. We're looking for a girl, the scarred man said, brushing his coat back to show the butt of a pistol. Goes by Brielle. We heard she was squattin' out here. Xander didn't move from where he stood. She's not squattin', she's home. The weasel-eyed man spat. That right. Because back in Miles she was bought fair. That makes her she's nothing to you, Brielle said. And if you think you're dragging me back, you're worse fools than you look. The scarred man stepped forward. "You got no right," Xander cut him off. "You got no claim. Her father's debts died with him, and the law knows it. You're here for spite, not justice." "Maybe we are," the man growled, "but spite can be enough." Brielle raised the rifle, barrel steady. "Then you'd better be ready to pay in blood." The man stared at her, then at Xander. Something in the stillness of them both gave him pause. His hand hovered near his holster, then dropped. "Not worth the trouble," the weasel-eyed one muttered. They backed away, muttering curses, and mounted up. When they finally rode off, neither Brielle nor Xander moved until the dust had long settled over the trail. Back inside, she set the rifle aside, her hands still. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, voice quiet. "I didn't shake." He reached for her hand. "You stood," she looked at him, something soft and certain in her eyes. "There's no going back now." He touched her jaw, fingers rough from fence work. "I don't want back, I want forward." "With you?" That night she laid her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of a heart that had stood between her and the world. Outside, the wind had changed again. It no longer carried warning. It carried promise. They married in June, beneath the cottonwoods by the creek. No preacher, just Xander's hand in hers and the solemn words they gave each other under open sky. He carved 2 bands from willow, soaked them in oil, then slid one onto her finger, the other onto his own. Brielle planted a row of herbs along the cabin's west wall: yarrow, lavender, and mint. He built her a bench from cedar planks, and each morning she sat with her sewing or her spinning, humming tunes she hadn't dared sing since childhood. They wrote to the sheriff in Miles City, sending copies of the deed, the letter from Deputy Carver, and the names of the 2 men who'd come riding. Word came back slow but sure. No further claim would be made. The matter was closed. When the first snow fell the next year, the roof held strong. The cabin stayed warm. The mule grew fat on oats, and the chickens laid regular. They spoke little of what had passed, not out of fear, but because peace no longer felt like something fragile. It felt like something earned. Xander built a cradle that winter, though they had no child yet. "Just in case," he said. She'd smiled, pressing her palm to his, fingers lined with the same calluses. On cold nights they shared the same quilt, her feet tucked behind his knees, his hand resting over her hip. He still rose early and she still watched the trees before breakfast, but now they shared the silence without needing to fill it. They grew older, but not apart. He told her once, while sharpening the scythe, that her voice had made the land feel less empty. She told him, while mending his coat, that his steadiness had let her become herself again. And in that wide stretch of years, through storms and drought and all the quiet in between, they never stopped choosing each other, not once.